Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name's Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. If you've been following along this month, all of February, we are hosting amazing women in science, exploration, adventure, and conservation. We kicked things off yesterday with our first event, and we have a ton of events coming up throughout the rest of February. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Jill Brooks. Jill graduated with a degree in marine biology in the UK in 2006 before taking an internship at the Bimini Biological Field Station in the Bahamas. She became manager of the field station there, where she tagged and tracked a variety of shark species. As well, she's still working on a coastal shark telemetry project on the coast of Florida. Now she's a PhD candidate at Cooke Lab at Carleton University and looking more at the movement of freshwater fish. So Jill, it is so great to have you joining us live today. We're excited to learn a little bit more about you and some of your adventures, and then we'll let our classrooms take over with some questions.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to try and share my screen, my entire screen. Is that working, Joe?
Looks good so far. I can see me. And looks like you are full screen. We're good.
Perfect. Okay. So like Joe said, I did my degree in marine biology in the UK in a town or city called Bangor in North Wales. And my school looked a little like Hogwarts, so that was fun. But it was down by the ocean, which was awesome to study marine biology. So then after I finished my degree, I took quite a leap over the Atlantic, and I went to the Bahamas for a little while. And this is kind of the circle of my career so far, is from the UK to the Bahamas, from the Bahamas up to the Rockies in Canada, and then from the Rockies all the way back over east to Ottawa in Ontario, near the Great Lakes. So I'll start with my time in the Bahamas. I was working in a tiny little a research station in Bimini, a small island in the Bahamas. And it was there I got to live in this fun, tiny house with about 20 other people. And we got to do a lot of field work, working with mainly sharks. So you can see in the picture on the bottom right, there's a bunk bed. That was my bed for 2 years, and I had to share that small room with 3 other people. So it's very, very close. So we looked at everything from baby lemon sharks all the way up to big hammerhead and tiger sharks. But to catch and work with the little guys, we would set what are called gill nets. And we'd set these from the mangroves and out into the sea. And then we'd check them every 15 minutes and pull out any sharks that we long lines and big buoys or buoys with big baited hooks on them to catch the big tigers and hammerheads and big bull sharks. So these are the things that we would do with the big sharks. So we've got the external tags up along the top. So that's a fisheries tag that has just a number on it, so we know who's who. The one in the middle is a satellite tag that we attach to the dorsal fin and it pops up. We also do an internal tag, and I'll go through more of that later with my other project, but we would insert an acoustic tag inside the shark, and that would ping, so we would know where the shark is. And we would also measure and take blood. So I then moved from the Bahamas up to Ottawa to do some research in the Great Lakes. So I'm doing my PhD in fish ecology in freshwater fish. I mainly study walleye, which is a very popular fish for fishermen and commercial fisheries in the Great Lakes. But I also study and track lots of other little fish. Can anyone see an odd one out in these these pictures? Did anyone notice this guy? So I also track what are called invasive species. So fish species that aren't supposed to be in the Great Lakes, but have found their way either through the pet trade or ships bringing them in. So they're a bit of a nuisance. So we need to track them to see where they're going and what they're doing. So this is where I work. It's Hamilton Harbour. It's a very urbanized and industrialized harbour, the western end of Lake Ontario. And it's got 2 steel factories and lots of houses and lots of industry. So a little different to the Bahamas, a little bit colder as well. So to study the fish, I'll take you through all the different steps. But first we have to catch the fish. And then once we've captured them, we need to what's called anesthetize. So we shock the fish to sleep. Then we put the tag inside of the fish, just like this. And then we stitch the fish back up. So once we've stitched it up, we then measure the fish and put an external, so a tag on the outside of the fish so that we can easily see if it's been tagged and it has its own number. And then we let it go back in the lake. And this is what happens with the tag. So the tag inside of the belly pings a certain code that our microphones that we have underwater can hear, and it can tell us that this fish was here at this time on this day. So the beauty of this is we can do it in the summer, but we can also do it in the winter when I don't really want to be outside in the snow and ice. So we can still see where the fish are going, even though it's too cold for us to be outside. And then with that, we get these cool videos, and we get to see where the walleye or the fish are moving at certain times of year. And then with that, we can make these cool maps that shows where the hotspot areas are of the fish, so we know where we need to go to study them more. So then, as Joe mentioned, I'm still working on some research down in Florida where we're tracking sharks. Does anyone know what this one is? It's a great hammerhead. And people like to fish for them from the beach, and they have to bring them really close to the beach in order to let them go. So they catch them, bring them in, and then unhook them and then release them back. But we need to see if that's harming the sharks and see how well they survive once they've been released. So what we do is we attach an external, what's called a satellite tag, and that goes on the back of the shark. And then we let the shark go, and it swims away. And then after a certain amount of time, the tag pops off and then floats to the surface and then transmits to a satellite where we can then see where the shark was, and we also know where it had been since we released it. So I also get to work with some people I met while I was in the Bahamas. So I get to go on some fun research cruises out into the Bahamas too, where we get to study sharks, but also cool iguanas and conch and fish. So there's a lot of options and a lot of cool things to study. And I also get to do fun things like this, like outreach and science communication, where I get to work in the community and show people the cool fish and creatures that live in the Great Lakes and in the ocean. But mainly I get to sit at my desk and analyze data and stare at a screen that looks like this for hours on end, or do lots of reading, again, for hours on end. So it's not all playing out on the boats in the ocean or the lakes, but definitely a lot of desk time for me as well. So yeah, I don't know how long that was, but.
All right, if you click that green button again, Jill, it'll bring you back to us.
Okay.
All right, perfect. You're back. All right. Well, Jill, I was lucky enough a few years ago to visit Bimini and spend some time diving with the great hammerheads, and it was absolutely awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about the sharks in Bimini and maybe the Bahamas as a whole, and why the Bahamas is kind of unique, a unique special place for sharks?
Okay, so there's lots of different habitats in the Bahamas. So there's lots of reefs, there's lots of seagrass, mangroves, there's lots of deep water. So lots of places for sharks to live, but also they're protected there. So no one's allowed to fish for them, so they're allowed to just live and travel wherever they like within the Bahamas, and they don't get caught and eaten or harvested or sold. So yeah, it's a very awesome place to study them because there's so many of them, and they're so different because there's so many different types of places that they can live.
All right. And when you catch something like a hammerhead or a tiger shark, why do we want to tag them? What kind of information can we learn from those tags and following them for a period of time?
Yeah. So knowing where animals live and where they move and why they're moving is quite important to protect them. So they're already protected in the Bahamas, but when they leave the Bahamas, they go out into the main ocean, over to the US or down into the other side of the Atlantic, where they're able to get caught by commercial fishing. So it's important to know where they're going and how long they're spending in certain areas. So then you know how to protect them or conserve them. So also it's important to know where they're migrating to give birth. So lemon sharks give live birth. They have pups every 2 years. So it's really important to see where they're giving birth, to see where the babies are, and maybe look at those habitats for protecting those areas too.
All right. And I know a lot of classrooms might be thinking, why are we worried about sharks? Why is it important to protect them? Can you give us maybe just a brief summary of the trouble that sharks are in right now? Because I don't think a lot of students realize that sharks are in trouble.
Okay. So yeah, sharks all around the world are being caught for their meat and also for their fins. So there's a lot of demand for shark fins, for shark fin soup. So a lot of sharks are in danger of being caught just for their fins. And then, yeah, the populations are in decline in lots of areas of the world. So they're in trouble. A lot of the species are in trouble. A lot of species are in trouble. So it's important to study them and see where they're going and how they're doing as populations.
All right. And then I know that there's a pretty cool study going on, long-term study with the lemon sharks. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So because the research station has been there for 25 years or more now, they've been catching the same sharks over and over again for many years. So we know all the sharks there have been tagged and measured, and their DNA has been taken and sampled. So we know who's brothers and sisters with who, and who's mums, who's dads. So we have this huge family tree of all the sharks in Bimini. But they come back, the females come back to where they were born, in the same nursery area, in the same mangroves, 13, 14 years after they were born, and they give birth to their pups there. So it's a big, cool cycle of migration. So it's a very important pupping area and mating area for lemon sharks.
All right, very cool. Well, I'm jealous. I only spent a week in Bimini and 6 hours with the hammerhead, so I can only imagine the experiences you had spending 2 or more years down there. So pretty lucky.
Yeah.
And I think that's the really cool thing about science. Would you say that your field has allowed you to travel and see a lot of things that you might not have been otherwise?
Absolutely. Yep, I get to travel a lot, maybe too much. But yeah, I've been all over, got to see some cool things, and it's all to study new things and why are animals there and what are they doing and why should we be concerned about them. So yeah.
Very cool. And I bet you've made some pretty cool friends around the world as well with all of your adventures.
Yeah, I can travel and visit probably most countries now.
All right, very cool. Well, I noticed that we did have another classroom join us, and I'm guessing that it might be our class from San Antonio, Texas. If it is our fourth graders from Montgomery Elementary, just send me a little message in the blue chat sidebar. So it's over on the left, looks like a speech bubble. I'll send a message there. Just send me a message there to let me know that you got in okay. But for now, let's start meeting some of our live classrooms. So I want to give a shout out first to Mrs. Rubin's grade 5s who are joining us from Illinois. Their microphone's not cooperating today, so they're going to send us some questions in via the chat sidebar, so I'll keep an eye out for those. But I do want to jump right away to Kalispell, Montana with Mrs. Landrum's group, so I can see they might be having a little bit of technical troubles right now, so we want to make sure we get their question in just in case we lose them. So Mrs. Landrum, if you want to turn your microphone on for me, you're just off my screen, and we'll grab a question or two to make sure we get some questions in. So it should be at the top. It should be red. If you click it, it'll turn white for us. And then you can go ahead and ask us a question or two. All right. We'll give them a second to sort that out, and we'll jump to another classroom. We'll go to Freehold, New Jersey to start. We've got some grade 3s hanging out with Mrs. Reading. Let's get their microphone turned on. How we doing, New Jersey?
Hi. It's actually, we have an early lunch period, so the kids were so excited. They're actually giving up recess, and we're going to eat later to meet you.
Aww.
So some of them had to run out. They had to go get their lunches, and then they'll put them in the back. But they were so psyched. So we have a question, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Did it in the screen? There we go.
How do I
No, you just talk. Just talk.
We have learned about climate change. So is climate change affecting sharks?
Yes, probably. So that's a really hard thing to study because sharks travel so far and they migrate really long distances. But a lot of sharks like a certain temperature for the water. So they will try and stay in the certain temperatures of the ocean. But if those ocean temperatures are warming, they're going to have to keep moving further and further north to find the same temperature that they really like. So yeah, probably affecting them. Yeah.
All right. And that is the really tricky thing. And the really good thing about marine biology is there's tons left to figure out and explore and discover, especially with species like sharks that range so far, have really secretive lives. There's still so much to figure out. So if there's any junior marine biologists out there, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yes.
All right. Very cool. Well, we'll come back to New Jersey shortly. Let's see. Let's go to Polsky, Wisconsin. We have some students hanging out in Mrs. Weidman's class. Let me get their microphone on.
I'll say hi.
Hi.
Oh, man. Lots of hands. Who's first?
Brooklyn, go ahead. Write down a little.
How long have you been doing the job?
12 years I've been working in marine biology. Long time.
Would you like one more?
Yeah, let's get another one up. That was an easy one.
Yeah.
Here, see, come on up here. This is Harrison. Let me ask your question.
How do you know how the sharks get underneath ice?
How do I know if sharks are underneath the ice? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are sharks that live up in the Arctic, and they're called Greenland sharks, and they live mainly under the ice. They're really deep. They live all the way at the bottom of the ocean. But yeah, they live under the ice too. But we also track those as well. So you can put tags in those and see where they are going. So that's how you know they're under the ice.
All right. And I think it's a cool thing to add too, that because it's so deep and so cold, that the sharks can live longer. And I think recently they were thinking, what, 200-300 years? That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, they live a long time.
All right. So we do have classrooms who are viewing along on YouTube. Any classrooms who are doing that, if you look on the right, there's a chat sidebar. Let us know where you're watching from and send in some questions. But I want to jump back to Mrs. Landrum's class in Montana. I think I see someone standing up by the camera. If you guys do have a question, please turn on the microphone. It's just off my screen, so I can't reach it to turn it on for you. But if you want to turn that microphone on at any time and go ahead with your question, we're ready.
Okay, come here.
There they are.
Okay, bend down and ask him.
Hi.
Jackson, say hi. Hello. Can you ask your question? Can sharks smell blood?
Yes, they're really good at smelling blood. Really, really tiny quantities of blood. So yeah, they're pretty good hunters for that. They can smell it from miles away. If something's bleeding, they'll come in from miles.
And then maybe just to add to that question a little bit, Jill, sharks really do kind of have a sixth and even a seventh sense. Do you want to touch on those really quickly?
Sure. So sharks can also sense electricity. So they have tiny little jelly-like pits in their noses or in their head if they're a hammerhead, and those can detect electrical fields. So everything that's alive has a tiny electrical field. So if there's a stingray that's buried in the sand and you can't see it, they can sense it with their heads or their noses. So if you ever look at a picture of a shark's head, you can see what looks like pepper, and it's just like little sprinkles all over the nose. Yeah, they're really well evolved for hunting in the ocean.
And then I know freshwater fish have a good lateral line system. Do sharks have that too?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
We're going to, okay, there we go. I lost my page for a second. Let's go now to Mrs. Tracy's class. They're hanging out with us in San Jose, some fourth grade students. Let's get their microphone turned on. How are we doing, fourth grade?
Hi.
Hello.
What's up? I'm dead.
Okay, listen. Okay, Dylan, you're gonna ask your question nice and loud.
My question is, how do you put in the trackers in sharks and not harming them?
Without harming them?
Yeah.
So you have to, the internal ones, the ones that you put in their tummies, you do have to make a little cut, and it's about this big, and you just get a scalpel or a knife and just make a tiny little incision like I showed you in that video, and you just put it in their bellies and stitch them up. So they're really good at healing, our sharks, so it goes away in a day or so. So they don't feel it really. And you also, when we're doing those surgeries, we put them upside down and they go into what's called a tonic immobility. So they're asleep when they're upside down, so they don't really feel it. So it's tricky, but you have to just harm them for a couple of seconds and then they're good to go. Good question.
Right. This is a good question. Mrs. Rubin's class sent us in a question via the chat sidebar, and I'm wondering if you've ever encountered this before. They're wondering, have you ever tagged a smaller shark only to find it was eaten by a larger shark?
Actually, 2 times. So with the tags inside their belly and they're pinging, you can have a microphone under the water and you can follow them. So we sit on a boat and we put our microphone in the water. It's called a hydrophone. And then you track them manually and you just drive around and you can hear them. But we were tracking a baby shark, and then all of a sudden we had to speed up with our boat and we kept losing the shark, and we were going really fast. And we're like, this baby shark cannot swim this fast. And yeah, it's been eaten by a big shark. So then we were tracking the even bigger shark, and obviously they can swim faster. So that was a crazy day. And then another time we put a tracker in a tiny newborn lemon shark, and the same thing, we were tracking it, and a barracuda actually came and just chomped it in half right in front of us. So it was quite sad, but definitely a circle of life. Barracudas can get really big, and definitely definitely eat baby lemon sharks.
All right. Well, there we go, Mrs. Rubin's class. It has happened at least twice.
Good question.
That's pretty cool. We're going to jump now to Stavely, Alberta. We have some grade 5-6s who jumped in first thing this morning because one of our classrooms in Burlington was canceled with the freezing rain.
Nice.
We're excited to have our 5-6s joining us. Let me get their microphone on. Let's see. There it is. How are we doing, Alberta?
Good.
How do you get the sharks?
So it depends on how big they are. So if they're really small, we can set them some nets, and they swim into the net and they get caught in their gills, and then we just come along, grab them, and put the net, and that's how we get the babies. If we want to catch the really, really big ones, we have to put fish on hooks, and then we set hooks out either on a long line, which is a really long rope with lots of hooks, or we attach a hook to a massive float and let it just float around until something comes and bites the fish, and then they get hooked in the mouth and then they swim away, and then we have to chase them and get them.
All right. With those techniques, have you ever had anybody out to the lab who's done it free diving? I know there's some people who use a modified harpoon gun and they can just pop it right into the fin, and it's a little less maybe stressful for the sharks.
Yes, so some species aren't very good at being caught, like the great hammerheads or black tips. They are ram ventilating, they're called, so they always have to swim to be breathing, whereas the lemon sharks and tiger sharks, they can sit on the bottom and open and close their mouth. That's called buccal pumping, and they can breathe like we do. But the other species, like the great hammerheads, because they always have to swim, when they get hooked, they don't like it because they can't really breathe very well, so they stress themselves out. So we try not to catch those just for tagging. So we can, in the Bahamas, in Bimini, it's super shallow and the sharks come in and they're not scared of humans, so we can swim down and spear with it's like a bow and arrow underwater, and spear a tag into the shark without having to capture it at all.
All right, very cool. So we do have a question coming in from YouTube. We have a class, some third graders joining us in Uxbridge, Ontario. And let's see, they've got a few questions here, but let's go with this one. With the sharks that you work with, maybe the great hammerheads and the lemon sharks, do you know what their average age span is?
Ooh. So I'm not sure about the hammerheads. So it's really hard to study how old a shark is, because unfortunately, you have to kill them, and then you take a vertebrae from their spine, and then you count the number of rings. So it's like a tree. So they grow a new ring every year. So if you go under a microscope, you can count how many rings there are, and you know how old it is. But obviously, you had to kill the shark in order to find that out. So people try not to do that as much anymore. So with the lemon sharks, I know that we've been catching the same. We have one individual that I caught in 2013, and we had caught her in 1997 and put a tag in it, and then we caught her again in 2005 and put another tag in it, and then we caught her again in 2013. So we know just from tagging her for that length of time, and when she was first tagged, she was pregnant and she was having babies there, so she must have been 14 years old. We know that they can live to up to 37 years. So she was older than me when we caught her. So it was very, very cool.
All right, great question. And any other questions online, keep them coming. But let's swing back to some of our live classrooms again and see if they have a follow-up. So let's start with Mrs. Reading's class again in New Jersey. If you guys have another question, we're ready.
Yeah, we do. All right.
This morning I read an article, and it was about shark biologists. Do you face challenges?
So we were talking about some of the challenges that's faced, like when you're on the water, and that it's not always, it's not always easy, I'm sure.
Yes. So there's lots of challenges. So first of all, the main challenge is weather. You can't go out and you can't go out when it's a hurricane or when it's super stormy or super wavy, because a lot of the things that we do we need a shark to be next to the boat or on the boat, so it's not safe for them if it's super rough and the boat's going crazy. So that's the first challenge. And then the second challenge is we can't see them. We don't know where they are, so we have to find them to catch them, to then tag them and measure them and things. So it's really hard to know where to go to find a shark before you can even capture it. So lots of challenges, and it's very expensive as well. The research is very expensive. Those tags are thousands of dollars, so it's hard to get funding to do all these studies. So lots of challenges.
All right, and it's probably not great if you just put a new tag on and it gets eaten by another shark. All right, awesome. Let's see, Montana, it looks like you've been able to stick with us. Do you want to turn your mic on if you have another question? We're ready for you. Or you can send it again via the chat sidebar, whatever's easier.
Sorry. Chris, do you have a question? I don't know. Debbie, you want to come ask your question? Me? Hey, come on. Come here.
Are you dancing?
Sorry. Okay, here you go. Talk into the microphone here.
Hi.
Hi. You're going to ask her your question? Okay, ask her.
What's your favorite shark?
What's your favorite shark?
What's my favorite? Probably the lemon shark. Because they're cute when they're babies and they're fun when they're big.
And how do they get that name lemon shark?
Because they're very lemony in color. So they spend a lot of their time on sand and seagrass. So they're very pale, so they can blend in really well. They don't taste like lemons, though.
Good to know. Awesome question. Thank you so much from Kalispell, Montana. Let's see. Let's turn the microphone on in Mrs. Tracy's class. If you guys have
You was donkey.
Hi.
Hi. Wait,
Hi.
how often do sharks get pregnant?
So again, I really only know that about lemon sharks, and that's every 2 years. So they get pregnant, they have their babies the year after, and then they take a year off, and then they have their babies the year after. So every 2 years. Good question.
All right. And just to add to that a little bit, I think lemon sharks are live birth, but some sharks do lay eggs as well.
So there's 3 different ways. So there's live birth, like lemon sharks, where they're born and they have a belly button like we do, and it's open when they're born, and then it heals up in the next few weeks. So we can use that to know how old they are. Then there's sharks that lay eggs, and they just lay eggs in the sand or near the reefs and then just swim away and leave them. And then there's a third kind where they lay eggs but keep the eggs inside of them until they hatch, and then they give birth.
All right. Very cool.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Alberta, our class joining us in Stavely. Let's get their microphone turned on. Do you guys have another question?
Carson, did you know that? Who has a question? Maddie. Come on up.
What's the deepest depth a shark can go?
Ooh, great question. I don't know. The Greenland sharks are in the probably 1,000 meters, I think. They go really deep, but I'm not sure. Sorry.
That's okay. It just gives them something to do after class today, is jump on Google and find out how deep the deepest shark can go. I think that's important to add too, is you do study sharks, but when you study a couple species, you know those couple species really well. And some of the other ones, I mean, there's, I think, somewhere between 400 to 500 different species of sharks. So knowing everything about every single shark species, probably not going to be an easy task.
No. Thank you.
No, very cool. I know there's some deep sea shark species. And recently I was on a expedition on a boat where we were doing ROVs, diving them down over 3 kilometers. And there were some shark species down there. So I think some can live pretty darn deep. All right, very cool. Thank you, Alberta. Let's go to Mrs. Weidman's group. Your microphone is on again.
Hasley, go ahead.
What happens when you put the taking the tracker in? What happens when it breaks?
Do you mean from the video where the satellite tag snaps off and floats to the surface?
No, I mean
No?
like one that goes inside.
If it breaks, then we probably won't know about it, unfortunately. They rarely break though. But once the tag is inside the shark, it doesn't leave. It stays inside them all the time. So we won't know if it's broken. We just won't ever hear from it again.
All
Good
right.
question.
If somebody else has a question, I know there are lots of hands in this class. You can pop up and ask them too.
Go ahead, Mason.
How did you become doing this job?
So I like the ocean, I like water, and I used to like fish. Has anyone seen Free Willy? I used to watch Free Willy when I was little, and I wanted to be a marine biologist, just like in the movie. So that's how I started. Good question.
All right, very cool. And then Jill, those tags, the ones that are set to release and then they send all their information to the satellite, do you bother retrieving those, or at that stage they're not really of use anymore?
No, we actually have one that's just floating around in the ocean. We'll never see it again, but all the data that the tag has been collecting gets sent by signals up to the satellite, and we don't need to get the tag back. We just get all our data from the satellites. It's really cool.
All right. Well, Mrs. Rubin's class sent us in another question via the chat sidebar, and they're wondering about the tagging process. Have you ever been hurt while tagging a shark?
No. No. We usually, when they're upside down, they're quite calm, so that's fine. But no, they're pretty calm when they're on a boat or next to the boat eventually. But no, we're pretty safe.
Yeah, very cool. And then I know their skin is very smooth run one way, but then rough like sandpaper the other way. No kind of scrapes or anything from handling them.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, their skin's like sandpaper if you go the other way. And so if they're struggling and you're trying to get the shark still, it's just like rubbing sandpaper over your skin. So yeah, lots of scrapes, but no real injuries. We call it shark burn. It stings, but it's fine.
All right. And let's visit our class in Alberta one more time, just because I see someone waiting so patiently with a question in hand. So we'll give you guys the last question today.
Which shark was closest related to the megalodon, and did the megalodon exist?
The megalodon did exist. I would say, I'm not sure of that answer, but probably the great white shark is the most similar and most related.
All right. Good question. Contrary to what you may have seen on Discovery Channel, they are extinct, but they did exist. So that's a good question. And if you're really lucky on the right beach, sometimes you can find some of their fossilized teeth, and they're huge.
Massive.
That would be pretty amazing to have one of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we do have time. I think we can squeeze one more in, mostly because I can see Mrs. Tracy's class and someone waiting with their hand up. So let's get more.
You fall.
Yes. No. Thank you so much. Amy's ready to.
We ain't gonna argue.
Come on.
Hello.
Hi. How do hammerhead
Speak loud, please. Speak loudly.
How do hammerhead sharks sleep when they're swimming?
They don't sleep. They just they always have to swim, but they'll kind of like snooze, but they're still swimming, but they'll never fall asleep fully. So yeah, they just won't be hunting or eating, but they'll just be cruising and just chilling out, relaxing.
All right. I don't know how they do it. I need my sleep at night, that's for sure. Very cool. Well, classrooms, thank you so much. I know a couple of classrooms are starting to have to duck out for their lunches, but thank you so much for hanging out with us today and your great questions as always. And Jill, thank you so much for letting us steal some time from your day. It was so great to hear some of your story, and yeah, lots of questions. There's I can see some of the classrooms. It's tense and they all want to ask some questions. So if they want to tweet at you afterwards, is that okay with some more questions?
Amazing. Yes.
And I think it's Jill, at Jill Brooks 85. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
All right. So boys and girls, if you want to fire some more questions at Jill after the hangout, please do so there. If you took any questions, tag us on Facebook or Twitter. We'd love to see pictures. But again, Jill, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Thank you, everyone.
And I'll turn the microphones on. And boys and girls, if you want to get nice and loud and say goodbye and thank you. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for hanging out. Jill, you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, you guys.
Don't forget to tune in all month. We have tons of more hangouts coming up. So thanks, everyone.
Bye.